Welcome to Emotional Sobriety. How you doing?
I'm good. It's Saturday, so I got I got kids at home, but they should be pretty entertained. I've got two people on standby, keeping an
Nice.
eye out.
Last time,
How old are your kids?
They're 7 and 9.
Oh, well, that won't keep you busy at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
last time I visited Alan Berger in person, he couldn't make it today, but he had his kids parked in front of Encanto. That's a really good movie. Have you ever watched that?
It's a great movie. I saw an amazing TikTok about that movie and how each of the siblings and their gifts represents different personality types. But I was almost thinking it represents different personalities for children of addiction.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I I kind of thought about it, and it was one of those things where I was like, I should explore this further, and then I got off track. But someday.
Yeah, well, I hear Inside Out is a bit like that as well. Right? I have not watched that, but that's about all the different us's. You know, and
Yes.
Tom's always talking about the committee. That's what he calls it, the kind of like the jockeying voices inside our heads that we need to learn. We learn that we're the ones listening to that committee. We don't need to singularly identify with any one voice, including the addiction voice, right?
Right. And there's no, especially for like the movie Inside Out, there's no wrong feeling, right? Which speaks so much to emotional sobriety and learning how to accept that. So I highly recommend you check that movie out.
Yeah, I will. Well, just to get started, this is Celeste Yvonne here with us on the program. She's a certified recovery coach and author of It's Not About the Wine, The Loaded Truth Behind Mommy Wine Culture. And I was going to ask you first just to tell us about mommy wine culture as you describe it. In my recovery, I went to Betty Ford, and then in IOP, the group that I spent the most time with it was a lot of housewives and women who their drug of choice was wine. And there was a lot of shame, and there was a lot of, I'd love for you to talk about, the culture. And also what really stuck out to me is you said that you kept your sobriety secret for a year. And that's just it's very breathtaking, compelling choice that you made. And if you could speak to that a little bit, I think we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. Lots to talk about. So first things first, when I define mommy wine culture, I am speaking to the narrative that jokes or implies that parents need wine or alcohol to cope with the challenges of raising their children. So it's not necessarily someone who happens to be a mother who happens to be drinking wine. So I think that's the distinction we need to make. It's a very targeted message that says, my kids are the reason I drink. I whine because my kids whine. Here's another one. The most expensive part of parenting is all the alcohol you need to buy. So it's a very targeted message. It's a problematic message in a lot of ways, which we could get into if you like, but it's also a message that many women identify with or even use to justify their drinking. And as you've probably seen, we have seen a significant increase in women's drinking in the last decade, and even more so since the pandemic. And when I was writing this book, it was all about trying to understand that message, but also to understand why this mommy wine culture and this narrative identifies with so many mothers. Why is it so popular? It's a message that I myself was using to justify my own drinking. And now on the other side of it, and 5.5 years sober, I have to look back and say, why did I identify with it? How was it serving me? And how can we do better? So that's kind of mommy wine culture and that narrative in a nutshell.
When you say do better, you mean do better till we can in our educational process we can help people kind of see through that for themselves to get help sooner?
I mean do better in a couple ways. Number one, as you and I both know, alcohol doesn't help or support us or aid us in parenting. We know that, but I think a lot of women, when they are using alcohol to self-medicate and to cope, are still working through that and still trying to figure that out. So that's one thing. But two, when I think about do better, it's the narrative, right? I'm a child of an alcoholic. I can't even imagine how it would feel if my father also walked around with a shirt that says, my kids are the reason I drink. It's a very problematic message for our children. I think we can do a lot better than that. But also, when we use this message, and we use it in a lot of ways to essentially pat women on the back to say, yeah, this is really hard. You know, mommy needs wine. Sometimes it's not literal at all. We're just saying parenting's really hard. I see you struggling. Right. How do we better support women? What's a better message? What's a better way to support women? And there's a lot of things we can and should be doing societally, culturally, and in our own homes to better be supporting women, so they're not even feeling like they need something to self-medicate to cope. They don't need that crutch.
Well, yeah, that makes a lot. I mean, what makes sense to me about that too is, you know, we're always looking. We speaking as alcoholics, we're looking for those narratives that are going to make, you know, basically put us in a decent light, so supposedly with other people, but for me, you know, it's for myself. How can I see myself as something? And you know, and so it actually makes a lot of sense. That's one of the things I like to do with my clients, is help people when they think they're crazy realize they're not crazy. That whatever their process has been very logical, actually, and very rational, in the sense that it's like, you know, it's like the, you know, I'm an old white guy, so I mean, what's the old standard narrative of an old white guy? You know, well, you know, I drink so much because I work so hard. You know, I'm such a stand-up guy, and I take care of everybody, and that kind of still take care of you. It's still about you deserve it, you know, and that kind of stuff. So it's the idea of using what I'm thinking is the idea of using being a parent as that reason for drinking is, if I'm dealing with the psychology of addiction, I'm going like, it's brilliant, because it's a wonderful aspect of people, human beings, taking care of each other, taking care of their children. And so you could really find a lot of protection behind that, and not in people not to, I would imagine, to address it harshly.
I think it's such an easy way to justify what could otherwise look like a harmful habit you're forming, or a way that you are separating yourself from your emotions, or removing yourself from the discomfort and the frustrations, or even the anger that a lot of mothers can feel. And the history is fascinating too. I mean, this whole idea of mommy needs wine goes back quite a ways. And it wasn't always wine. You know, you think about
it was mommy's
little helper.
Pill.
Exactly.
That was when I was a kid. Yeah.
So it's evolved over time, but since, you know, the Rolling Stones, in the decades since, we've seen alcohol and the alcohol industry really target women much more, with pink washing a lot of their labels, with really presenting themselves to women as a target market. And so I think that has had an impact as well on not only mommy wine culture, but the increase in women's drinking.
Yeah.
What was a framework that you were able to lean on in your early days of recovery? And could you talk about that? And also, from the math I was doing, you did the pandemic sober. So congratulations on that. Congratulations on the sobriety anyway. But yeah,
Hey, I did too, Patrick.
and,
During the
you don't
past,
count.
I had a few more years practice, but still, you think that
Well,
was
yeah,
easy?
you did have a few more years practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
And I also want to go back to your question about not telling anybody the first year. I think it all comes back to this conversation about emotional sobriety, because it's, in the beginning, I wasn't emotionally sober. I was not doing anything to work that side of it, that aspect of it. I literally took drinking off the table and I white knuckled it. And my whole thought process was, I just can't drink anymore. And I did it with a lot of anger and frustration and feelings of a lot of frustration, but also like I was missing out.
Deprivation. You were being deprived of something. Yeah.
Absolute deprivation. And like, this is how I'm going to feel for the rest of my life. I only told two people. I only told my mom and my husband. And I was so afraid of digging deeper. I was so afraid of all of it. I did not see myself as an alcoholic because I saw my father's alcoholism and mine was so different. Mine looked so different from him. So how could we possibly—
your standard of measure for alcoholism was a completely different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really held me back in that first year. And it wasn't until I literally heard somebody say that they were 6 weeks sober and they were so proud of it, that I kind of had a light bulb moment that, wow, this is something we could be proud of. This is something we can embrace and lean into. And that's where I think my journey towards emotional sobriety began, was when I started having a new thought pattern around what I'm doing and what this means. And it stopped looking like deprivation. I started to see it for what it really was, which was liberation. But
you were moving towards something instead of just away from something. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's so well said. And I want to talk about the pandemic too, because that had such an imperative moment on my emotional sobriety too. When the pandemic hit, a friend of mine started the Sober Mom Squad, which is a recovery community. And I helped her kind of create that. And we started hosting meetings. And through that group, I found community. And that's something that I had never had prior in my sober journey either. Yeah. So the pandemic and the results of the pandemic helped me build my own sober tools and helped me chart this sober journey and get stronger as a result. When we started doing the meetings, when I started meeting other people, other moms who were just like me, and I started hosting, and I really began to embrace this side and this component of sobriety in a way that I never could have without a community. So yeah, that was a huge, impactful part of this journey. And I'm so grateful. I'm not so grateful for the pandemic, but I'm so grateful of some of the things that came out of it.
No, yeah, it's you're in good company with us. This our whole process and organization here has come out of the pandemic, because we've been working together a little bit before that, but Allen came right out at the beginning of that and said we need to do some stuff online, and we've been plowing ahead with that ever since. We've done 2 podcasts, we've done video series, we do this Thursday night group. It's like none of that would be, now personally, I always point out that personally the pandemic was fine for me because I'm a complete introvert and have no interest in talking to other people. So I was happy to just sit here and live on my farm. But it's like, in terms of making that connection to community, which the way you described that is it helps us remember that not drinking is just walking through the doorway into this thing. It's I've said for decades that it's about drinking, but it's not. It's about alcohol, but it's not about alcohol, and it's about drugs. It's not about drugs, because it really is. That's just the doorway, and the rest of it's about how to live your life in a way that and I love emotional sobriety's process coming out, because I've often wondered, what do people do who aren't addicts like us? It's like I always, after a while, I thought I have an advantage because I'm a drunk, and so I basically was tossed into a place where I needed to deal with this stuff. But emotional sobriety is something that's here for all of us.
The experience of making, keeping, and losing friends through recovery. And I'm sure there were some drinking friends that you may have had to leave behind, as I did. What was that like?
When I quit drinking, that was one of my biggest fears, was, what does this mean for friendships? What will people think? But what I've learned is sobriety is one of the best friendship filters you can find, because your true friends go right on through that filter. Right. It's the drinking buddies that get trapped in the and they never come through to the other side. And that's just fine.
Did you find also, I did, you're surprised about sometimes who comes through?
Totally. Oh,
it's
shocking.
Sometimes it was the opposite of what I thought. I thought, well, I'll never see that guy again.
Exactly.
Like not so. He's still with me, all these days with me today. It's like, and some people just disappear.
I'm sure I was that guy to somebody else.
Right. It's fascinating when you see who shines through, and which relationships were completely sustained through alcohol use and alcohol habits, and which actually had more to them and more depth than I gave them credit for. The other fascinating side of it, of course, is when you stop drinking, you see other people's drinking habits, and sometimes they're not nearly what you thought they were.
And they talk so fucking loud. It's like, seeing it from the outside is a whole education into itself, isn't it?
It's hard to watch people drink heavily now and find any sort of nostalgia for it. In fact, most of the time I just kind of cringe thinking about how many times I was probably that person.
Yeah.
I still feel haunted a bit by that. Well, the work of becoming more emotionally sober after you become physically sober, what is that looking like for you these days? I do 12-step groups and I do therapy. And there's a lot of work to be done. I'm about to start couples therapy with my girlfriend who lives with me. She moved in. We met in the rooms of AA, and we're working things out. This is like our first grown-up relationship, and so we're making a lot of the first types of mistakes with each other. There's just a lot of. I think I started using when I was 17, and it arrested a lot of my emotional development, and a lot of the work in recovery has been continuing the process that was stunted when I was a teenager. So how's it been for you?
I so agree with what you just said. I think that's been one of the hardest parts of recovery, and the recovery journey is kind of having to pick back up where you left off, which for me was probably as a teenager. If I am kind of at the emotional intelligence of whatever it is, a 16 or 17-year-old, that's a lot of years that I got to work back towards. And I think about in parenting, it's a very emotionally dysregulating job. For me, motherhood has been far more dysregulating than I ever imagined. And my job, first and foremost, as a mother, is to try to remain emotionally regulated when my kids aren't. And for me, that might be the hardest part of parenting, because I'm bad at it. And I give a lot of the blame of that to being emotionally stunted for so long through alcohol use. And yet that is probably the hardest thing I work on in my recovery, is learning those techniques to stay calm, to stay present, to stay in my body, to not burst out. And it's such a work in progress. And it's something that I feel like I take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back all the time in, because every time I feel like I'm making progress, something happens and I just go from 0 to 60,
Right.
just like that. And then I get so angry because it's like, I thought I was growing.
Calm, present in your body. And then the one you didn't put a word to, but that you demonstrated, was humility. The one you said that when you can sit there at the end of that and acknowledge that, oh, and by the way, after I do this for a little while, I fuck it up entirely, and I'm upset with myself about doing that. So, it's go, okay, to me, that's emotional sobriety, because that's accepting what's the truth in the moment, because that's emotional sobriety, is being in reality, right?
Mhm.
It's like, it's just what it is. It's not emotional. So often people do this thing. I hear it in our group, our Thursday group. Emotional sobriety is like being cool, calm, and collected. It's like, no, it's not. It's just being in touch with the truth. So if I'm a fucking basket case, then that's my emotional sobriety, as long as I can own it and take responsibility for it. And that's what you're talking about with this emotional. And what a powerful thing to say about parenting, emotionally dysregulating. No shit.
Mhm.
I'm not a parent, but that sounds like that. I bet you can't find a parent who can't identify with that. That's beautiful.
It really is such a roller coaster of emotions. Talk about when you talk about control, and we talk about control in sobriety a lot. You only have control over your own actions and your own thoughts. We can't control our children, not nearly as much as some might think. And when you let go of that and you recognize, I don't have a lot of control here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing the best I can, but at the end of the day, all I have control over is how I respond or react to what is happening before me. It is humbling. It can be extremely frustrating. But as parents, it can also be pretty powerful. When you're a mother or a father, you can set the emotional tone in the house. In fact, I do all the time, even when I don't mean to. If I am having
well, let me just talk. That's happening all the time. Any of us can talk about. Immediately you throw me back into an ab reaction of growing up in the house with my mother, who set the emotional tone in the house constantly. There was only one tone, and it was what her tone was. It's like, you're going to, whether you like that or not, you're going to contribute to it or not. So you might as well be conscious of it and take responsibility.
Well, and that's it. I mean, that's it exactly. So if I have some control over setting the emotional tone in the household, I need to work on that. Like, that is not something I'm just going to throw away. And when I was drinking early in my parenting experience, that was one of the biggest reasons I knew I had to quit, was because when I was drinking, I was as unregulated, as dysregulated as I could possibly be. And my children needed consistency. They needed calmness. They needed routine and structure. And I wasn't giving them any of that. No, I don't know how you can and be a heavy drinker. I don't think it's possible. So that was one of the reasons I knew I had to quit. And that is something that even in my sobriety, I will always be working on, because it's hard. It's hard when you're stunted emotionally from growing up with drinking. It's hard when you are a child of an alcoholic.
The only thing we can control is ourselves. And you describe the two places we can do that. And sometimes I think people make the mistake of forgetting the second one. The one is how I behave. The other is how I think, and how I interpret the world around me. That was one of the biggest light bulbs in the world for me, to know that I could actually make conscious choices about how to reinterpret what the world is to me. I could make new decisions about that, because that's the only way we can change ourselves, and therefore, and the only way we can actually have impact on others around us is by influence, not control.
Mhm.
And so, and I, I just, I didn't, not being a parent, I had not ever thought about it in those terms until you were just talking about that. I'm going like, okay, so I go around saying that about adults with other adults all the time, but I'm sitting there going like, okay, so if I'm a parent and all of a sudden, and with little ones, I'm supposed to control them. That's the language we have. It's like, and the idea that you have to go that so deep down to realize this is another human being that I do not control. It's first of all, it's so powerfully respectful of the child, which is what hit me right in the chest is like, yeah, because the child has to respond to whatever it is you're doing, and you can control them, I guess, by, my mom could control us by being in her mood and go behind the door and close the door, and all of us would get very quiet and not cause any trouble. So I guess that's control, but it's really just influence. And wow, I kind of got lost in my own thinking about that, but that's wonderful.
Well, Celeste, in recovery at this stage or over the last year, I've been working a lot on and thinking about perfectionism, and
not very well either, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Just wandering through it. Yeah. But how do you rate, or what's been your experience like raising the bar on yourself in recovery when it comes to motherhood, but doing so in a way that's loving towards yourself and not this corrosive perfectionism that we can sometimes get in the habit of doing, that like paradoxically it stifles regrowth, and it stifles the healing and evolution of relationships. What do you think?
Oh God, I mean, that's such a good question. I think sometimes, and I say this sometimes in my recovery meetings too, sometimes the only right thing I did at the end of each day is that I didn't drink. And I say that in parenting too. Like sometimes it can feel like such a failure of a day. All I have going to bed that night is just, at least I didn't drink, and because it's such a freaking roller coaster. And when you are with littles and all you have is to influence, to not control, it can be so frustrating. And when your children make choices that are harmful or have consequences,
or scare the hell out of you,
it can feel like control. I mean, not only is control out the window, but my head can go to very dark places in terms of intrusive thoughts. Like where will we be in 10 years? Where will we be in 5 years? Like, I had so many of these challenges with my oldest son because we had behavior issues from a very early age. And I'll tell you a story. This was right before I quit drinking. It's probably a month before I quit drinking. My son was only 3, but we were having phone calls from his daycare saying he's having behavior issues. He's hitting other kids. He's being defiant. We went to the doctor and we told him what was going on. And the doctor told me, well, he's 3. There's nothing we can do. We'll just take a wait and see approach. And of course, as a mom, I'm like, no. I'm not leaving here until you give me some way forward. Like, tell me what I can do. And the doctor said to me, he says, kids like this, they need stability. They need routine. They need structure. That's what your child needs right now. That's what you can do. And wow. In my stomach, I mean, you might as well punch me in the stomach because I am not giving him any of those 3 with my drinking. So when I think back on that moment with the doctor and I think about where I am now, I'm giving him what I possibly can. I'm giving him stability. I'm giving him a structured environment. I'm giving him routine, and I'm giving him a present mother. And sometimes that's that's just all I can do.
That's what you have.
That's what we got.
Yeah. Oh wow! When you say, even from this distance, I could feel the gut punch when you describe what the doctor said to you. I can't even imagine what that must have felt like at that time. But also, also kudos to you, because the three of us all knowing what it's like to be good old fashioned alcoholics in denial is like you let that through. It's your kid mattered to you so much, your child mattered to you so much, you let that through, because man, there's a lot of people who said a lot of things to me over a long period of time that should have hit me right in the gut, and I just walked right past them. So I admire that. I admire that you in that moment in time, you were being the exact right kind of parent your child needed. It was to listen to that doctor and feel terrible about yourself.
I had plenty of those moments too, where I just, passed it by, but that was one that cut deep. That was one I knew I had to listen to, because I was desperate. I felt helpless. And all I could think is, if that's the only thing I can do right now, that's what I've got to do.
Yeah.
What was the experience of writing the book like, the experience making it, and how it sits with you on the other side?
Yeah, this book has changed so much. I've been working on this book for 5 years. And I say that as somebody who's 5.5 years sober, because after I hit 1 year sober and I started writing about my sobriety, because up until then, I didn't do any writing about it. When I started writing about it, I started blogging about it. And I had an agent at the time who was helping me put together a book proposal for a totally different book. But when she saw my first post on my sobriety, she called me and she said, "We have to put the other book to the side, because this is your book." And it was from that moment that I started thinking about it in terms of, what do I want to talk about? What do I want to write about? And I started kind of putting this book proposal together, and that took forever. And then the pandemic hit and everything got put on halt. The proposal, the concept, me writing it, my eyes were even more open to, emotional sobriety. With the start of Sober Mom Squad, with building friendships around recovery, with learning how to be in these support communities, to help each other, to support each other, to connect with each other, and to mentor each other. When you read the book, you'll see it's a big part of my book now. What happened at the pandemic, you guys were there. You were there at the time. You saw what happened, where recovery meetings shut down overnight. The only thing that seemed to stay open was liquor stores. And they even expanded their services. There was drive-throughs now and delivery services. And, I saw people I knew relapse during this time. I know one person who died as a result. And we saw statistically that a lot of people overdosed or relapsed during that time. It was a really scary time. So when we were in these Sober Mom Squad meetings and having these conversations with their mothers particularly, who all of a sudden now we're homeschooling our children, all of a sudden now we're taking on these other mental burdens. And it was all consuming. It was terrifying in so many ways. And building a bridge to support mothers during that time in a way that it seemed like nobody else could or were, was such a gift for me as much as anyone else. That became a huge part of the book process. So by the time that we started picking back up on the book and moving forward, I had to change the book completely. the title of the book, it's not about the wine. Initially the name of the book was going to be called Mommy Needs Wine. I mean, we changed the book because it was during the pandemic that I realized, oh my God, this isn't about wine. My wine culture is not about wine. It's about mothers who feel like they are so sunk neck deep in doing anything and everything. They feel under supported, they feel undervalued, and they're using alcohol to cope because they literally have nothing else. Right. So that, in a nutshell, that's kind of how it came full circle to being the book it needed to be, but it took a long time. It's
interesting you say that, because what I've discovered through the years is some people will think that we're going to become an expert on something and then we're going to write a book about it. Yeah. It's like in every case with me, with every book I've ever written, it's just been an immersive experience in being in that subject matter, and I don't know how the universe works. I don't know, but there's more to it than just me writing down little words in a notebook. But it's like I hear that with you. It's an organic process that we get to participate in, but part of our job is to hold a loose grip so that it can become exactly what it needs to be. And there are so many, there's so much more we know at the end of the process. And I don't know if you found this or not, but I find I'll say something, I know something about fear after written the fear book is the idea. I don't even know if it's in the book or not, because I just know I know it because I experienced it during the writing process. It's just, and that's first of all, it's the most joyous way to write, I think. And yeah. So you were already a writer.
Mm-hmm. I was a motherhood writer for several years before I quit drinking. Cool. And it took me a whole year before I started being vocal about my sobriety to my followers and writers. And my book was supposed to be motherhood. The irony in all that first book was going to be called The Ultimate Mom Challenge. And it was my year-long journey of efforts towards becoming a better mother. And the same month that year-long journey ended was the month I quit drinking. I mean, that's when the real journey started. But I didn't know that at the time. But it's just, it's so funny how our higher power has a way of laughing when we try to make plans.
Well, yeah, and the only accurate insight is hindsight. We're always trying to have hindsight in the moment, and then we think we know what's going on when it's happening. It's like, no, we don't. It's like you look back and you go, oh, I see how that worked. It's like, when we look at the timeline.
Everything was meant to be the way it all came out. But
beautiful.
Yeah, it's in hindsight, it all is 2020. It makes perfect sense.
Sounds like an essential reading. And I just thought I would ask about your family and their role in your recovery. And I would imagine that, this is your work, it's your living, as well as, your personal recovery process. And how has it been kind of wearing all those things on the outside and kind of workshopping it, where everyone can see? And I'd imagine that that's helpful, is integrating them completely into, your journey back to stability.
Yeah. I mean, they've been involved obviously every step of the way, because they've been with me every step of the way. My husband, he still drinks. He is a normie in every sense, but
those people are weird, man.
I know, my mom too. They confuse the heck out of me. But
by the way, though, Celeste, they're fascinating. It's like, I love my hobby is interviewing people like that. I would go like, okay, so you can have a drink, and the ice could melt in the drink. You could get distracted from the drink by a conversation, and you could walk away from the drink with alcohol still in the glass. And they go, yeah. And you go like, whoa. It's like,
you're like the Jane Goodall of normies.
It reminds me, watching other people drink makes me feel like I'm watching animals on Animal Planet, just like, whoa, what are they doing?
It's weird. I know.
It's so true. But it was a process because, as you can imagine, when I first quit drinking, I was still so stuck up in this. I don't know what I'm doing. I know I'm my father, so I'm just going to quit and pretend like this is nothing, right? We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to think about it. I'm just not going to drink. And as a result, I think I really undermined the potential support. I know I did, from even my mom and husband, who knew I wasn't drinking, but they didn't truly understand why. They didn't know about the secrets. They didn't know how much I was really drinking at that point. And, obviously, if I could do it all over again, I would have done it so differently, because I needed that support in those early months, and I did not. And knowing what I know now, it would have made those early days so much easier. Now, it's something that I love to talk about, especially with my children. It's important for me to talk about, because I grew up in a family where we didn't talk about the thing. Nobody talked about the elephant in the room. We just covered it up and we hid it as a family secret. And I want to do it different. I want to have these conversations with my kids. My son was going to drink something I was drinking, and he says, "Wait, this doesn't have alcohol in it, right?" And I was like, "I'm so glad you asked, but no, it doesn't have alcohol." And he says, "Yes, because mom doesn't drink alcohol." And my mom said, "And do you guys know why mom doesn't drink alcohol?" And this is my 7-year-old. He goes, "Because she was addicted." And I was so proud of that, because I want them to know. I want them to know that, yes, mommy, like, still their mom, and they still think I'm cool. I'm sure that'll change soon, but and I wasn't able to safely drink alcohol, but they also see their daddy, who does safely drink it. I want them to understand the distinction. I want them to grow up knowing that they can talk to me about this stuff. No topic is off the table.
I love that. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a client yesterday that is a young man that I've worked with off and on for years, and he grew up as a child of recovering alcoholics. So his whole life his whole life was surrounded by recovery and really almost paranoid fear for his alcohol and drug relationship. And so one of the things that when I started working with him as a young man, as a young in his 20s, it's like he went regularly to AA meetings, but he had no history to indicate that he was an alcoholic. He never, it had just been assumed. And so it was a bizarre and interesting experience for me as well, because I'd never had somebody that basically showed up in full recovery that I wasn't even sure even matched the criteria for the diagnosis. I mean, I knew that, as my old sponsor used to say, 12 steps of recovery, only one of them mentions alcohol. The rest of them are about how to be a better person. The 12 steps ain't going to hurt anybody. But I love the idea that your kids get this way of seeing things in the microcosm of your family, of what we need to know about in the bigger world. That it's not that the alcohol is not the problem. The people, it's me plus alcohol. It's me plus tequila that's the problem, not tequila or me. It's like that's what that is, and that's what your kids know. That's cool.
And they get to see both sides of it. I love that they get to see both sides of it. I love that they see. They see my husband, who can drink one or two, and I love that they see somebody who doesn't have any. And they know that you can go to social gatherings and you don't need alcohol to have fun. Like they get to see that you still participate in life without constant drinks in your hand, which thing that I never grew up seeing. And I think it's a nice perspective that not a lot of children see, because alcohol is in all of our social gatherings right now. So it's a unique perspective.
Yeah. I
What
love
do
that.
you see as like the future of your career or of the club and your recovery coaching, which I didn't even get a chance to ask about, like how that's been going?
Yeah, so I actually just became a recovery coach in the last year. And I see it being more integrated with Sober Mom Squad, with offering group coaching opportunities. But I also really wanted to use my learning and what I got from my coaching experience to help in my writing. I do a lot of writing right now on sobriety and recovery, and I've always kept it to strictly my experience. But I would love to evolve what I'm writing about to be more from a coach's perspective, to be with more of a knowledge base around tips and advice and what we can do to support our loved ones. That's probably the most common question I get asked is how do I support a loved one who's struggling? And how can I do that in a responsible and useful way? So that was a lot of what took me there. But I definitely see more of that. But I also, I'm not totally sure. I don't know what's next for me. I feel like motherhood kind of it just shakes me up all the time anyway, that it's hard for me to kind of gauge what direction I want to go now that this book is out in the world.
Would you say that when you found recovery, it was the desire to be a better mother? Was that the main driving force, would you say?
100%. In fact, what I say now is my kids are the reason I quit drinking, but I'm the reason I stay sober. As we grow in our sobriety, our why can change. And as we learn the why we were drinking in the first place, it can help us better understand and develop those coping tools. So we don't need a crutch or a coping mechanism that's destructive. We do have healthier ways to do it.
I wish you well in your coaching thing, because, and I just, identify with that because, I mean, of all the things that I've written in my life, a lot of it has to do with me, but it's like those wonderful clients who've trusted me and shared with me. They're the ones that have given me so much information and material and educated me about, you're going to discover is this, but then you're going to discover everybody's not like me. People are way different from me. It's fascinating. Thanks for being here, and thanks for writing the book, and stay in touch with us. And if we can do anything to, just help spread the word about what you're doing, that's what all of this is about. So we're just one big community.
I appreciate that. Obviously, this is a podcast I could have used in my early sobriety, and it's certainly one I can use now too, because as you know, it's a journey, not a destination. So I'm so glad you are speaking about it, educating us on it, and exploring it further, because and I will always want to know more on, and I'm sure everyone else in recovery can say the same.
Tend your life, tend your myth, cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.